Hey guys, Darren back again. Today we're going to look at the old Sega Master System Power Base original console. I really like this original because it's got RGB straight at the back. It's got the card slot there for the card games and the 3D glasses, and it just looks really 80s. I like it much better than the Model 2. But here in Australia and the UK, in the PAL territories, we're stuck with 50 Hertz, which is no good. So we're going to go ahead and install a Switchless mod kit today to bring it up to 60 Hertz and just control the whole thing back and forth via the reset switch. I'll show you how it's done. So my console's a bit banged up and fairly dirty, to be honest. Even the controller is. That's a video for another day. We're going to focus on the installation today. So first thing you want to do is really power up your console and test it out completely. Make sure it works perfectly. Because if we're going to install a mod kit, we just need to make sure things like the reset button function perfectly before we try to introduce a new circuit. So let's just power it up. All right, that reset fine. So I know for a fact that my console is actually pretty good. I've gone through this one before. Just check yours out. I have actually done a mod to the back of the reset switch, and I'll show you what I've done there to make it a bit more reliable. Just put a small nail actually and super glued it down the hole. And what that does is it gives it a very nice, precise push on the rubber reset button, just so it pushes perfectly. The plastic round stub here is not quite precise enough to trigger the reset every time. So I just put in a nail about so long, snip off the excess length, put it in with a bit of super glue, and that little protrusion of the head is absolutely perfect. It works every time. First step is to make sure you've got all the right tools. So a cutting blade to cut some traces, a soldering iron, a digital multimeter, basic wire strippers, some tape, some solder, maybe some solder braid, and a screwdriver. So let's go ahead and pull it apart. So to pull it apart, just obviously disconnect it. We need to take out these screws along the bottom. Then we can lift the lid. So the lid comes up fine. There's nothing attached. There's no wires, nothing. Next is to take out the screws from the board. I've already gone ahead and pulled those screws out of mine. So that will just lift right up. The only thing you really need to note is the screws here in the cart slot are much longer, and they're actually black than the other ones, which are sort of the silvery color. So that's the only difference. Then you're good to go. Pull the whole board out. And while we're at this stage, we'll probably give all this top and bottom a wash. Now would be the good time to clean yours up if you haven't already done so. So let's take a look at my board and my revision. Looking at the board here, it's a VA3, PAL VA3. So there's two sets of instructions for this kit. There's a VA6, which is what we're going to use today. It's exactly the same. And there's another one, the M4, which is for a different board revision. Open both up, compare the pictures to your board, and just see which one looks correct. There's only pretty much two layouts of these boards. So step 3 is to cut some traces. Now we need to do that in order to control the reset button and also the 50-60 Hertz switching off that jumper down there. So we do it on the underside of the board, but what's important to note is if you've got a reset button that looks like this, the pin we're interested in is that bottom left-hand corner, because I know it joins that resistor over there, and that resistor runs directly to the CPU, and that's the one we're going to cut because that's the one we want to affect. And what we're doing is we're going to be soldering one wire to each pin effectively and control that separately. This here over on JP2, that's pretty much the 50-60 Hertz switching right there between pin 2 and 3. So to do this job manually, you would just control the voltage on those two pins, but our kit will do that for us. So to be very specific, what you need to do, so these 4 pins here, that's the underside of the switch. And that lower left on the top side joins to that resistor. That resistor then goes down to the CPU. So we need to sever directly between that. Just very carefully cut that. Like that. And we'll do the other one while we're here, which is the jumper. So we need to cut between pin 2 and 3 of the jumper, which is here. So for me, that's the center and the right. And when I switch it over, it'll be the center and the left. So that's those 3 there, 1, 2, 3. And if you look closely, you can see that there's actually a jumper in between 2 and 3. So that's exactly what we're cutting. We'll do that as well. So you can see I've put a nice cut there. So just be extremely careful with that step. I don't mean careful not to cut your fingers. I mean, don't slip with the knife, because if you score the board, you'll cut several traces and it'll be a real nightmare to repair. So just be careful with that. Now let's grab our multimeter and just make sure we've done that job properly. So we'll just turn it on. Switch to logic if you have a logic setting on your multimeter. And all that does is it tests the points A to B if they are connected. It'll make a beep if they are. So we can then go to our board and look at our 2 points. So this one here on the bottom of the reset and that one there are now not connected. If they were connected, they would be beeping, so that's great. And the other one down here off the jumper 2, that pin and that pin. So they are still connected. So I haven't done that properly actually. Let's have another go at that. Let's try again. There you go, that's better. And that's why we test, because it might look like you've done a proper job of it, but you know, electrically it didn't cut through. So that's why we test that. And the next step is to modify the LED. So flip it over, and on the underside again, the little trace that comes down off the LED, that one right there. So that's the legs of the LED, and that wire there needs to be cut just so we can control the voltage ourselves. So once again, we do our multimeter test on that. And that's cut, so that's perfect. Okay, so that was step 3 complete, which was cutting traces. On to step 4, we need to actually remove the LED completely. So heat up your soldering iron, put a large tip in there. I use this big chisel tip. It's got a little fine point for solder, like fine solder work, but it's also got enough material to really get things hot and penetrate. So melt your main LED point there. We're going to take that right out and try and get as much solder off as possible. There you go. So drag your solder wick through and take the solder off. Your fingers are going to get a little bit hot doing this, but you know, you only have to do it for a couple of seconds. Okay, with a fair bit of that solder removed, you're never going to get all of it with braid. Hold the board on its end like this, grab hold of the LED with your fingers, and heat one side up and walk the LED out. So just kind of put pressure on that pin. Hit the other side up, put pressure on the other pin, and it's going to set in between. You're basically going to be putting the LED on big angles like that until the whole thing comes out. So we call that walking the component out. Heat it up, and move. One more time, and there we go. So the LEDs come out, you know, it's just like heat, move, heat, move, heat, move, and the whole thing will just come out. If you've got a desoldering gun, go ahead and use that as well. I've got one, but I just demonstrated sort of the old-fashioned way to do it because most people won't have that tool. Okay, so just keep working on those 2 holes until the actual holes themselves are nice and free and clean, so you can poke the new LED through it. It can take a while, but just persist with your wick and maybe poke an old component leg down through there to help free it out, like a resistor leg or something. So get that nice and free. We're not going to need the original LED anymore, so we can put that aside. Okay, so the next step is to install the new LED. Okay, so with that all prepared, flip the board back over, and we're going to take a look at the top side and refit the new LED. So you'll have an LED like this in the kit, and you'll have a bit of tubing sort of support like this, in the kit. Just insert it down all 3 holes so that the leftmost tag, which is going to be the green color, comes out to the left like that. And then looking down at your board in this orientation, the longer leg, which is the ground wire, goes to the right hand connector, and the second one goes to the left hand hole connector. And this leg here, the green one, we're just going to leave that hanging for a second. So put that in like that, and we'll solder it in place. So as you prepare to solder it in place, you can just use a small pair of pliers and just bend the legs over just so the whole thing holds itself into place, and then you'll be free. You'll have both hands free to solder that in. Trim the legs flush with some flush cutters, and you're done. Okay, so that's our LED reinstalled, and the leg down there, we'll solder to that in a second. Okay, moving on to step 6 in the instructions. We need to just put the board aside for a second and prepare our wire. So we need to just split this wire into its different strands. So separate the blue from the green, separate the green from the yellow, separate the orange and yellow together, and the red, brown and black together. So we're going to need to strip them. So use your wire strippers, just feed them in just a small amount and just strip that off. You can do 2 at a time like that, it's fine. We can even probably do all 3 at a time. So let's try that now. Yep. So they're all prepared. Now this is the point where we strip them. So the blue can come completely off. So can the green. Then the yellow and orange stay together. And so does the red, brown and black. Okay, so step 7 is to solder the wires onto the pins. So I'll zoom you in. We've got ground, pin 57 of the CPU. We've got 5 volts, reset in, reset out, LED 1, LED 2. You don't actually have to tin them up front. It probably is better, but you know what? A nice simple twist to bring all the fibers together and then poke them down through the holes is a lot easier actually. So that's what I'd probably recommend you do. Okay, so then when that's all soldered up, you should have something that looks similar to that. Bit of solder on the top and the bottom, nicely separated. Okay, so step 8 is to basically flip the board back over to this underside, position our soldered up board to the left here. That's going to kind of sit like that in the case. And now we just need to run our wires across the board and solder them into place. So the first ones I would do is the red, brown and black. And they go in that sort of position on our 3 jumper pins down there. So red to the left, brown to the middle, black to the end. And then, you know, it's up to you how you want to adhere these wires to the board. If you want to basically glue them down or use tape, I'd recommend electrical tape or Kapton tape. Try and avoid using hot glue because the actual temperature of the hot glue can damage the solder joints. But that's up to you. So let me put this one in place and I'll move on to the next. Okay, so just like that, those 3 are soldered on. The next 2 is our yellow and orange. They go onto the reset switch. So just there, The yellow goes to the main switch side and the orange goes to the other side of the severed trace. You can do it either like this or like this, it doesn't matter, just whatever you prefer and how you want to route the cables. Okay, so those are in place, and then the final one on this underside is the LED. So we just put that on the right side pad. So just melt the solder, join that wire in, job's done. My wires ended up looking something like this, with some just red electrical tape just to hold them down. The good thing about the old Master System 1 is there's actually plenty of room under the posts down here for wires to run, so it's a great console for beginners to get started on. So don't worry too much about getting this dead flat because there's plenty of space, but it is good practice. Then the final step is to run the green wire to the LED. So look, there's no correct answer to this either, just feed it however you think, but something I've been doing for years is actually pass wires like this between the legs of components, and that sort of holds them down to the board. So, you know, underneath that one, probably underneath this third one, and then we'll solder it in to the wire. So let me just pull that through like that. It doesn't need to be tight or anything, I'd actually keep it kind of loose. Get your approximate distance, snip it off, solder it in place. So at this stage, everything's installed, and I think this is a really good time to test things out because if we go and fit things in now, it's really hard to rewire anything if we need to. So let's fire it up. Let's watch the color of the LED and see what happens. So we got blue here at the moment. It's coming up on my screen, and that's 50 Hertz for me. Is it meant to be blue or green? That's interesting. So push it once and it resets as normal. Excellent. So all we need to do to go back to 50 or vice versa is press and hold, color cycles, and then let go on the color change. And you might have even heard the sound of the music change speed there. So that's how you sort of tell. So the colors, like in composite video on my computer monitor, they look a bit saturated, but I think that's just because it doesn't understand PAL 60. This is still running at the PAL spectrum, but at 60 Hertz, so colors are just a bit saturated. Just giving you a quick look, that's the 50 Hertz standard, and I'll show you what I mean by the saturated look. So just put that into 60. Yeah, it's a little bit saturated, but so that all seems to be working well. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so let's take it over to the CRT and see what it really looks like via RGB. Okay, that all tested out really well. Happy with that. So let's go ahead and put it back in the case. Sits about there. I think these are great consoles for beginners because they're just extremely easy to work on and they're quite forgiving. The last thing is probably this little adhesive tab, a bit of padding I should say. I'll just put that on the back of the board, peel off the final layer, like that, and just choose somewhere to mount it. I'll probably just put it right there against the case. There you go, your wires sit pretty neat. They run onto the board. As I was saying before, there is just huge amounts of room under here, so it's no real big deal. The only thing to be aware of when running those wires was obviously avoid the screw hole in the middle of the board. So the wires do pass near that. Just avoid that. Avoid the holes underneath, these sort of areas, and you should be fine. Other than that, that's it, guys. We'll screw it all back together, and it's fully functional. It's that easy. The lid would go on, and you're all said and done. So I think I got different colors on the LED than what was expected, green versus blue, for 60 versus 50. Now I've checked the instructions and I've wired it up as per the instructions that I've got. Blue on the LED one, green on the LED too, but you could just switch those two wires around to change the color to match the frequency that you want. It doesn't really matter, that's a personal preference thing. You might actually prefer a red LED, red and green or red and blue or something. So to be honest guys, wire this up however you want, the blue and the green wires, it doesn't really matter, it's personal preference on that. But that's it guys, I'll probably leave the video right there. So thanks for watching. I hope you were able to run through the installation of yours step by step, and happy gaming. See you next time.